2002. There are nearly 7.8 million people on the waiting list for treatment. That is some number, the highest it has ever been. There are 761 fewer GPs than there were 4 years ago, despite the government promising more. And it took ambulances on average almost 42 minutes to respond to things like strokes and chest pains in October. That's more than double the target. Well, with all that, Health Secretary, you wonder why anybody would want to do the job. But as you said at the beginning, you care very much about it. You know that it is a privilege to have the job. But when you look at those numbers, how would you describe the state of the NHS?
Well, the NHS looks after 66 million people. We have 11 million inpatients each year. There are doctors and nurses and volunteers working in our hospitals day in, day out. And I totally understand the...
Not going to pay them well, are you, though, right? Not going to get down the table and negotiate with the unions for a year and a half, are you? Right? You're going to give the nurses the actual pay that they want, are you? No, not going to do any of that.
The focus on those cases where NHS care is less than we would hope and expect. But I do think it's also important to recognise that actually there are some very, very good news stories in the NHS. And may I just correct one thing? On the statistics, the waiting list is, it's actually 6.5 million people who are on waiting list. It's 7.7 pathways.
Yes, but if you're waiting for two important things to happen to you, you know, it's absolutely right that these things are counted twice. Nobody would dispute that there is lots of excellent care, but there are lots of very serious problems. I mean, do you acknowledge that there are serious problems in the service?
Well, yes, and this is why we have record funding into the NHS, but we're also, we have a series of plans to tackle, for example, urgent and emergency care. So in preparation for this winter, because of course we know that the NHS, like every other healthcare system in the world, when temperatures drop, is going to come under pressure. And so, for example, we're putting 800 new ambulances on the road to tackle those concerns that we all have about ambulances getting to people on time. We've got 5,000 beds being installed in the NHS at the moment to help provide that extra capacity for people.
Wow, I can't believe that that one of the solutions to the problems in the NHS might be expanding capacity through capital investment. Wow, I can't believe it's only taken the government 14 years to recognise that maybe solution to the NHS problems could indeed be capital investment in expanded capacity. Wow, what a revelation.
You are trying to prepare, but we know from our viewers that these statistics often mean terrible things in real life. Let's hear from one of them.
Hello, I'm Lynn. I'm on a waiting list for back surgery and have been for over a year. I've been told the waiting list is years and that I'm not likely to get the surgery anytime soon. I'm restricted as to what I can do, and I can't go on much longer like this. What are you going to do about the NHS waiting list?
What do you say to Lynn?
Well, first of all, I'm so very sorry that she is suffering in pain like that. You know, I want to help Lynn and everybody else in the country that is facing these waiting lists. And this is why, in fairness, the Prime Minister has made...
I hope people will just finally come and realise, right? They will just finally realise after all of these years that all of the scaremongering and all of the things that people say in opposition to the Conservatives in regards to the things that they do when they're in power with regards to the NHS, right? I hope they realise that we weren't just saying things because we were lying, right? Our fears weren't unfounded. You put the Tories in charge of the NHS and they wreck it, right? I'm sorry. Like, I have plenty of criticisms of New Labour, but at least the NHS worked under New Labour, and in fact worked so well that it was the best healthcare system in the world, ranked. And yet they continually say, oh, it's all just the continual Labour line about what the Tories will do to the NHS, and every single time they're in power they ruin it. Every single bloody time. And they still won't get the message. They still won't get the message. And I'm like, look, now you're waiting years and years and years for all of the important appointments that you need. Like, now, next time, the next election comes around, for example, and people are telling you to vote for someone other than the Conservatives. And people will say, oh, it's fine, the Tories will be fine with the NHS. And then just remember, I hope that we'll remember these moments when they come round at the next electoral cycle, when the Conservatives are trying to come back into power. And all of the Tory voters try and tell you they can be trusted with the NHS, and they realise and they remember that it's bollocks. It's a load of bollocks, and anybody who tries to pretend that it isn't can go f*** themselves. Because it's always been the case that they've been terrible with the NHS.
The waiting list, one of his priorities.
And it's gone up since he did that. I mean, let's just show people what's happened to the numbers, because it's important to understand the context.
Yeah.
this is what has happened to waiting lists. We know, of course, the pandemic made things much more challenging, but our viewers can see it was going up well before the pandemic. Lots more money has gone in. There are many, many more staff. This is...
Yeah, because like they have invested a little bit more in recent years. I'm not going to undermine the increased investment in the NHS that we've had over the last 4 years, for example. But this is an anomaly. This is not usual, right? In fact, it was only because Boris Johnson was so different to every other Conservative that this ended up happening, right? When you let George Osborne, Philip Hammond, when you let Norman Lamont, when you let Michael Heseltine, all these other people in control of the NHS, it doesn't get the funding that it needs, and the NHS waiting lists go up, right? You can literally look at a graph and see the waiting lists go up under John Major, then go down under Blair and Brown, and then go up again under George Osborne. And austerity is the failure of this. Failure to spend, failure to invest is the root cause, is patient zero, lol, for all of the issues with the NHS that we've seen. And for them to come out and try and tell us that, oh, actually, no, everything's fine, it's not a problem. Or for Starmer to come out and say, we're not going to turn on the spending taps, which we'll see later on. It's just pattern nonsense, right? Capital investment is necessary to fix these things. Continual investment is necessary to fix these things. Fiscal prudence is not spending no money. It is spending money on things that you need to spend money on, that it is prudent to spend money on, not just not spending any money ever, which austerity tells us is correct, right? And this is why we're in the position that we're in.
The situation that people like Lynn are having to deal with.
So if I may just try and explain some of this. So you're absolutely right to explain more money than ever before going into the NHS, and we have deployed that on trying to get more people into the NHS. So this week we met our manifesto promise that we would recruit a further 50,000 nurses into the NHS. That is great news that we've been able to achieve.
And there's still tens of thousands of vacancies, but I'd like you to address
very
it,
much so.
But this is the Prime Minister's target, and it's going the wrong way.
In terms of waiting lists, so we have all these, the plans that we have in place to deal with urgent and emergency care, to deal with what is called electives, in other words, people that are coming in for non-emergency care. But we do have to acknowledge that the impact of the industrial action has really had an impact on waiting lists. So it's since December.
Yes, it has. It has had an impact on waiting lists, which is why you should have come to the table to negotiate all of those years ago, right? It's over a year since the industrial action started, and Steve Barclay was sitting on his arse, right? Steve Barclay was sitting on his arse, not bothering to negotiate. That's your fault. And then you capitulated anyway. You gave them pay offers anyway after wringing your hands and twiddling your thumbs whilst the waiting lists went up and up and up, right? Clearly, this is not the root cause. Austerity is the root cause, right? Because that not only caused the lack of investment, but caused the stagnation in salaries as well, which put a strain on recruitment and retention. So that's all part of a myriad factors here. But if you're going to blame industrial action, then yeah, that's your fault. You did that. You were the ones who kept doctors' pay too low. Like, you did that.
Last year, we've seen some 1.1 million appointments have to be rescheduled. And so when I was appointed as Health Secretary, I wanted to try to address the industrial action with doctors. And I'm really pleased that in the last 3 weeks I've been in post, we have been able to reach a settlement with consultants. And I very much hope that consultants will vote for this when it's put to them. That will help to address some of that. But we are very clear that, you know, we want our doctors, our nurses to be able to work in the NHS, because that way we'll be able to not just deal with Lynn's case, but obviously help prepare for the future.
And of course, sorting out the strikes was a big blockage in all of this. Why then did your predecessor, Steve Barclay, sit in that chair for months saying he wouldn't talk to the doctors?
Well, look, what we've done with the consultants.
Wow, Laura Kernsberg asking the questions that's necessary to be asked. There is a first time for everything.
And I've, by the way, had a really constructive relationship with them so far, and I'm very much looking forward to having that sort of relationship with doctors in training, with our nurses and others. But what we've done with the consultants is we have looked at their contract. That contract was set up in 2003. It didn't have the sorts of things that we would expect in our own working lives.
But my question is, so you're explaining that you hope you've got to deal with them.
Yeah. The private sector that everybody else operates under has managed to destroy a bunch of our terms and conditions And so your argument for destroying the doctor's terms and conditions is that working people should put up and shut up, is it? What? Oh, that contract was done a while ago, back when terms and conditions were better. Yeah, funnily enough, when Conservatives come into power, the working conditions of working people in this country gets worse, right? The working classes lose a bunch of the access to the kind of conditions and terms that they had under previous administrations. Isn't that weird? Don't you find that strange?
My question is, you've said that the strikes are a big part of the reason why the waiting lists are sky high, why people are suffering. Why then did the government sit on its hands for months refusing to talk to the doctors? Isn't that responsibility on you too?
So there are two things here. The pay review board process, we have stuck to that. What we have announced in the last couple of weeks does not touch the headline rate of pay. It's about the underlying employment contract. And it's actually really exciting for consultants because it means that whereas in the past it's taken up to 18 years to become qualified as a consultant with different sort of bureaucratic stages in the process, we have shortened that to 14 years with 4 progression points. And importantly for the taxpayer and for patients, this is not about time served. These changes are about the skill sets, the qualifications that potential consultants
and we've got a lot to talk about, but just before we move on, how would you rate the chances of getting a deal with junior doctors? Briefly, please.
I have had an extremely constructive start to our relationship. I met them a couple of weeks ago. I popped into a meeting that we had, that officials had this week. I very much hope they know that I won't be able to meet some of their asks, but I am very interested in having conversations with them about, for example, the conditions in which they live, in which they're working. And when I've been visiting hospitals, talking directly to doctors, they've told me stories about, the rotas and how that has an impact on their ability to keep going in what is a very tough job at times.
So you don't think they're militants like your predecessor?
Look,
it's a straightforward question.
I always take people as I find them. So it's been very constructive, and I'm very...
I mean, it says a lot about Steve Barclay, right? That even Victoria Atkins, who yesterday I described as one of the most hapless economic ministers, or Tory ministers, sorry, that we've seen in recent years, right? Second only to someone like Rachel McLean, who's one of the worst. It tells you how bad Steve Barclay is. That even Victoria Atkins is better.
Very keen for us to continue that.
One of the things that people are doing because they're giving up on the NHS because they can't wait too long is sometimes turning private. Let's hear from one of our viewers. Actually, we're going to show you what one of our viewers said. Denise in Suffolk got in touch to say she was in too much pain to wait. She took a bank loan and crowdfunded a new hip. She now worries she needs the other hip done but would have to sell her house to do that. Is that acceptable?
UK twinned with America, right? Where GoFundMes is how you fund your hospital appointments. Love it. Great. Definitely not dystopian. Welcome to Tory Britain, folks. Welcome to neoliberal Britain. Because we don't just criticise parties here, we criticise party ideologies. Because that's where they get their policy from.
Of course not, and this is why the Prime Minister has focused on waiting lists, as I say, and we are trying to get those down. We're making some progress. We have seen some of the longest waits virtually eliminated, but there is no easy answer to this. And again, I very much, my focus as Health Secretary will be to trying to help people such as you've described.
Can you commit to it with the numbers going the wrong way? Can you commit that you're actually going to hit these targets before the general election?
We very much. We are looking to meet those targets, but I need, please, the consultants to pass this settlement that we've put forward. I hope very much that doctors in training will be able to reach a settlement with us as well. And then if we've removed the threat of industrial action from the NHS, then those people who, for example, in the October...
Well, if you're saying that we need a UK Mr. Beast, Zede, so that people can get the hospital treatment without having to crowdfund, then subscribe to me on YouTube, and maybe I can become the UK's Mr. Beast.
Set of actions. We had 40,000 appointments being rescheduled each day. Well, then that stops, and we're able to get on with the business.
Just to be clear, then you're saying there that if the doctors accept the new deal, the Prime Minister might hit his targets, and if they don't,
we're throwing everything we can at this, but not because I want to come onto the show and give you easy answers. It's because exactly for the people that you've described in today's show, we need to be helping.
But I want to point out to our viewers what you've just said there matters, because you're essentially implying, although perhaps not quite spelling out, that the Prime Minister's target to cut waiting lists won't happen unless you can sort out the industrial disputes.
We are doing everything we can, but we have an enormous amount of goodwill at the moment from from the BMA and from others, and I'm keen to encourage that.
Again, the fact that they have offered a new settlement is a development in this industrial dispute, right? Given that Steve Barclay for months and months was saying, this is a final offer, we're not going to further negotiate, having not negotiated for ages and twiddling his thumbs, doing nothing for months and months and months, right? It's refreshing that they've realised they basically can't win the election if any of these strikes continue. So they've been forced back to the table and forced to revise their offer, which it just shows you again, chat, strikes work. Strikes work when you know that your labour is invaluable. Might be something worth remembering.
And again, would very much ask consultants to look at this settlement, because actually it's a very modern contract, which I hope they'll find acceptable.
Have you ever used private healthcare?
I used it once for a second opinion many years ago.
Do you think
but I've used the NHS my entire life. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes on the NHS, and it's supported me every year of my life since.
Let's talk about a different part of the NHS then, GP.
Also, again, going back to a previous point, it's really telling. She says, well, this is a modern contract. Yeah, a worse contract, right? Modern just means worse. It's like modernisation reforms in the rail network. Yeah, making things worse by inputting less conditions for the people who work there.
GPs. So Camilla, who's the chair of the Royal College of GPs, was talking about the pressure on them. And she made it sound also like you're trying to convince yourself like you can avoid a sort of winter crisis. Yeah. There are fewer GPs now than when you made a promise to increase them. So what's going wrong?
Well, we've actually recruited some 2,600
But there
more
are fewer
GPs.
full-time GPs, and you promised 6,000 more.
Yeah, but we want to recruit more GPs. We know some of the challenges.
Yeah, to be fair, Laura, they also promised 40 new hospitals, and half of them just became refurbishments for existing ones.
That I'm sure Camilla will set out. We know some of the challenges they have faced, particularly coming out of the pandemic, where people stayed away from the NHS and had they had conditions that they were concerned about, that they perhaps weren't coming to the doctors during the pandemic because they were worried about COVID and worried about the pandemic. So we know that there's that sort of group of people coming forward. But I would point to the fact, and I'm extremely grateful to GPs for delivering this, which is we've again reached another election promise that we made in 2019 of 50 million more GP appointments in 2019.
Which we should also point out to viewers
really
that includes COVID vaccinations, which is an important part of that too.
But important part.
It is important.
Oh, come on! Oh, the way they fudge all these numbers. Oh, we've got record spending in the NHS. Just loads of it was procurement for PPE that was unusable and money that we threw at Michelle Moan. Come on, pull the other one, mate. It's got bells on.
It's part, but it does include vaccinations. I'd like you to give me a yes or no answer to this. Thinking of everything that we've discussed, all of the pressures, is the NHS going to avoid a winter crisis?
We are going to do everything we can to do this. It's my number one priority for the winter because I know the worry that people have, particularly when an accident or something like that happens, a fall.
Which means the people who are most at risk because of a winter crisis in the NHS or underfunding in the NHS or failure to be able to get waiting lists down for the NHS are mostly older people. And other people who really do need the NHS, and why I am happy that so much money from the state gets spent on the NHS, to be able to protect the lives of these old people. These are the people who are going to be losing their lives because of NHS failures over the winter, because of lack of investment. And these are Conservative voters, right? This is a Conservative voting demographic. They're voting to be democided by their own government. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership to just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.